The trolley barn should have been demolished years ago. That was the first thing Arthur Bennett thought as he stood ankle-deep in muddy floodwater. The second thing he noticed was that the old overhead trolley cable was humming. Not loudly, just enough to hear over the dripping rain. He frowned. There hadn't been electricity connected to the building for decades. So why was the cable vibrating? 3 weeks earlier, Arthur and his wife, Eleanor, sat quietly inside a county auction hall. Both were 72 years old. After 45 years of marriage, they had imagined retirement would be peaceful. Instead, the landlord sold the apartment building they'd lived in for 20 years. The new owner doubled everyone's rent. Arthur's pension wasn't enough. Eleanor's savings had nearly disappeared paying medical bills after Arthur's heart surgery. Buying another home seemed impossible. So they searched county auctions. Nearly every property sold beyond their budget. Then came the final listing. Old Riverside trolley barn. Flood damaged. Unsafe. Sold strictly as is. The auctioneer looked around. Opening bid. $10. Silence. One investor laughed. You'd spend more pumping out the water. Another shook his head. The roof leaks. The foundation's sinking. The city's been trying to unload that thing for years. Arthur quietly looked toward Eleanor. She smiled. The same smile she'd given him when they married. The same smile she'd worn through every hardship. She nodded once. Arthur raised his paddle. $10. The gavel struck. Everyone laughed. One man actually applauded. Congratulations. You just bought yourself the biggest headache in the county. Arthur simply smiled. His father used to tell him something. If everybody agrees something is worthless, somebody stopped asking questions. 3 days later they arrived at the trolley barn. The enormous brick building stretched nearly the length of a football field. Broken windows. Rusted steel beams. Floodwater covered most of the concrete floor. Abandoned trolley tracks disappeared into the darkness. Nature slowly reclaimed everything. Yet something felt strange. The massive entrance doors had recently been greased. Fresh boot prints crossed the muddy floor. The old electrical control cabinet looked surprisingly clean. Someone had visited recently. Arthur unlocked the office door. Inside smelled of cedar, old paper, fresh coffee, and machine oil. Again, fresh machine oil. Eleanor looked around. This place feels. She paused. Looked after. Arthur nodded. It does. The office furniture remained neatly arranged. Dust barely covered the bookshelves. The fireplace had recently been swept. Nothing looked abandoned. Everything looked prepared. Then Eleanor noticed an envelope resting on the manager's desk. Arthur and Eleanor. Arthur immediately recognized the handwriting. His father's. His heartbeat quickened. His father had died 15 years earlier. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside rested a handwritten note. If you're reading this. Then people laughed exactly as I expected. Arthur smiled despite himself. That sounded exactly like Dad. The letter continued. Don't pump out the water first. Repair the roof. Nothing else. No explanation. No farewell. Just instructions. Exactly the way his father always communicated. The next several days became exhausting. Arthur repaired broken skylights. Eleanor patched cracked roof panels. Together they replaced rotten support beams. Every evening they sat on overturned buckets eating sandwiches while watching the sunset through broken windows. Oddly, they felt happier than they had in years. The barn slowly came back to life. On the 6th evening, a heavy storm crossed the valley. Rain hammered the repaired roof. Arthur smiled. Not a single leak. Then, clunk. A deep metallic sound echoed somewhere beneath the floodwater. Both froze. Another clunk followed. Slow. Mechanical. Rhythmic. Eleanor whispered. You heard that? Arthur nodded. The vibration traveled through the old trolley rails. He grabbed a flashlight. Together they followed the sound. Near the center of the barn stood an enormous rusted trolley maintenance platform. Arthur tapped one of the submerged rails. Solid. Solid. Then, hollow. His heartbeat quickened. No, the maintenance platform wouldn't move. It weighed several tons. Eleanor slowly examined the nearby electrical control cabinet. Unlike everything else, its brass lever looked polished. Recently polished. She smiled. I think your father left us another puzzle. Arthur walked over. The cabinet door opened effortlessly. Inside rested an antique copper trolley token. Odd. He picked it up. One side displayed an old trolley. The other carried a simple engraving. One last ride. Arthur laughed softly. That sounds like Dad. He inserted the token into a narrow slot beneath the lever. Click. The brass lever unlocked. Arthur slowly pulled it downward. Deep beneath the trolley barn, ancient machinery awakened. Steel gears quietly turned. The enormous maintenance platform slowly rolled sideways across hidden tracks. Floodwater rippled in every direction. Arthur and Eleanor stepped backward. What? Beneath the platform, a massive reinforced steel hatch. Cold air drifted upward. Attached beside it rested another envelope. Arthur and Eleanor. Again, his father's handwriting. Hands trembling, Arthur opened it. Good. The trolley barn isn't your inheritance. It's protecting it. Arthur unlocked the steel hatch. A staircase descended deep beneath the flooded building, far deeper than any basement should reach. Concrete gradually replaced brick. Steel support beams lined the tunnel. Ventilation systems quietly hummed. Automatic lights illuminated one section after another. The passage finally opened. Arthur stopped breathing. An enormous underground complex stretched beneath the trolley barn. Archive halls, engineering workshops, research laboratories, climate-controlled vaults, rows of secure storage chambers. Everything immaculate, everything operational, everything preserved. Eleanor whispered, "This is impossible." Arthur slowly approached the nearest cabinet. Each carried engraved brass labels. Transportation patents, property holdings, rail systems, royalty agreements, current operations. Current, not abandoned. Current. Arthur's heartbeat accelerated. He opened one cabinet. Urban transportation technologies, electric rail patents, current licensing agreements, current royalty statements. Everything remained active. Everything still generated income. Then, at the center of the enormous underground chamber, a magnificent walnut desk waited beneath a circular skylight carved through solid rock. Resting neatly on top, one final envelope, both their names, written in his father's unmistakable handwriting. Arthur and Eleanor. Arthur's hands trembled, because suddenly he realized the flooded trolley barn had never been a worthless building. It had been protecting the greatest legacy his father had spent an entire lifetime quietly building. Arthur stood silently beside the walnut desk. The underground complex stretched beneath the old trolley barn like a forgotten city. Research laboratories, engineering workshops, archive halls, climate-controlled vaults. Rows of polished steel cabinets disappeared into the distance. Nothing looked abandoned. Nothing looked forgotten. Everything looked ready for work. Eleanor quietly reached for Arthur's hand. Neither of them spoke. Arthur slowly picked up the final envelope. His father's familiar handwriting immediately tightened his throat. He opened it carefully. Inside rested a thick handwritten letter. The first sentence made him smile. "If you've reached this room, then Riverside Trolley Barn finally fulfilled its purpose." Arthur sat in the leather chair. Eleanor stood beside him reading over his shoulder. The letter continued. "Good. Everyone thought I kept buying old trolley equipment because I couldn't let go of the past. The truth is, I was quietly building the future beneath it." Attached behind the letter were ownership certificates, access cards, patent files, legal documents, and financial reports. The first page carried a title, Bennett Transit Systems. Arthur frowned. He had never heard the name. He continued reading. Electric rail technologies, urban transportation systems, power distribution equipment, bridge engineering innovations, rail safety technologies, dozens of patented inventions, hundreds of licensing agreements. Every one remained active. Every one continued generating royalties. Current royalties. Not historical. Current. Arthur slowly leaned back. His father hadn't hidden stacks of money beneath the trolley barn. He had quietly created technologies that modern transportation companies still relied upon every day. The letter continued. People admire the trains. Very few ever notice the systems making them run. Arthur smiled. That sounded exactly like Dad. Always fascinated by the unseen parts that kept everything moving. Then he reached the financial reports. His breathing stopped. The yearly royalty income exceeded anything he had ever imagined. Enough to replace every dollar they had spent over a lifetime. Enough to guarantee Eleanor would never worry about another medical bill. Enough to provide security for generations. Yet strangely, the money wasn't what affected him most. Only one question remained. Why them? The answer appeared on the next page. Now let's discuss something more valuable than wealth. Arthur's hands trembled. You probably think I left this because you're my son. You're wrong. He swallowed hard. I left it because both of you spent your lives building each other. Tears quietly rolled down Eleanor's face. The letter continued. 45 years. I've watched you choose kindness over comfort, loyalty over convenience, hope over bitterness. Arthur smiled. Every difficult year flashed before him. Long workdays, tiny apartments, second-hand furniture, unexpected hospital visits, bills that always seemed larger than their paychecks. Yet Eleanor had never complained. Not once. The letter continued. Most people measure success by what they collect. I've always measured it by what survives hardship. Arthur reached for Eleanor's hand. She squeezed it gently. They opened another cabinet. Leather-bound journals filled every shelf. Nearly 50 years of them. The earliest volumes contained engineering sketches, transit designs, prototype drawings, patent applications, business plans. Gradually, they became personal. Family photographs, camping trips, Christmas mornings, stories about Arthur and Eleanor's marriage. One journal immediately caught Arthur's attention. Written during their first year together. They bought a kitchen table with 3 different legs. Instead of replacing it, they rebuilt it together. Arthur laughed. I remember that table. So do I, Eleanor smiled. Another journal. Written after Arthur's heart surgery. The handwriting became noticeably heavier. He worries about becoming a burden. He doesn't understand that Eleanor has never carried him. They've carried each other. Eleanor quietly wiped away tears. Arthur turned another page. The final journal entry. Written only months before his father's death. If Arthur and Eleanor ever find the room beneath Riverside, I hope they discover gratitude before prosperity. For several minutes, neither of them spoke, listening only to the quiet hum of the underground ventilation system. Because suddenly, the hidden complex no longer felt like an inheritance. It felt like love. Decades of planning. Decades of quiet belief. Patiently waiting until the right moment. The following months transformed everything. Patent attorneys verified every invention. Transportation engineers confirmed every technology. Financial auditors validated every licensing agreement. Everything proved authentic. Every patent remained active. Every ownership record legally belonged to Arthur and Eleanor. Soon the offers arrived. International rail companies, infrastructure corporations, private investment firms, engineering conglomerates. The numbers became staggering. Enough money to spend extravagantly for the rest of their lives. One afternoon, Arthur sat reviewing another acquisition proposal. One signature would transfer everything. He almost considered it. Then Eleanor quietly placed something beside him. A faded photograph. It showed 2 23-year-olds standing outside their first apartment. Arthur held a rusty toolbox. Eleanor carried a tiny flower pot. Both were laughing. Behind the photograph sat one handwritten sentence from his father. The happiest journeys were never about the destination. They were about who stayed beside you along the way. Arthur smiled. The decision became effortless. They declined every offer. Instead, they expanded Bennett Transit Systems. They funded scholarships for students studying civil engineering, transportation technology, and infrastructure design. They restored historic trolley barns across the country, converting them into museums, community centers, engineering workshops, and public innovation spaces. They established grants helping retired workers facing unexpected financial hardship. Most importantly, they created affordable housing inside several restored transit buildings for elderly couples forced from their homes by rising costs. Exactly as they once had been. The old flooded trolley barn remained standing. From the outside, it still looked like an abandoned brick building beside forgotten railway tracks. Visitors admired its restored architecture. Few imagined one of the country's most valuable transportation archives rested beneath its foundation. Arthur preferred it that way. Several years later, he and Eleanor sat together on a restored wooden bench overlooking the old trolley tracks at sunset. The rails glowed beneath golden light. A modern electric streetcar quietly passed in the distance. Arthur smiled. Dad would have loved seeing that. Eleanor nodded. He already did. People often asked about the trolley barn, the flood, the hidden chamber, the fortune. They believed buying a flooded building for $10 had made Arthur and Eleanor wealthy. They misunderstood. The underground complex gave them financial freedom. His father's unwavering belief gave them something infinitely greater. The certainty that a lifetime of love, sacrifice, and perseverance had always been worth more than money.